officer with the University of Auckland in New Zealand. So again, we have an international lineup, and we're so grateful to our international guests. They're coming in from different time zones in the evening on Thursday, in the morning on Friday, but we're so grateful that you could have made the time for us today. And we're so glad to have our attendees who are coming in many numbers. Grateful that you have found this topic to be of interest and that you're with us today. We anticipate another rich discussion, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And just to let you know that in addition to having this being broadcast on Zoom, it's also being streamed on the JAMCOPY Facebook page. And I believe that there's also a college in Mandeville that will be also airing it on their internal radio service. So it is being broadcast to a wide range of interested parties who are working in the information world, trying to ensure that students continue to have access to information in a way that respects copyright. So thank you to everyone who is with us today, and we look forward to a rich and informative session. In our first panel, we'll be hearing from the perspective of the librarians as to their experience with COVID-19, what challenges they've faced, what challenges existed prior to COVID, and how have they been managing the process to continue to allow access to information in a way that respects copyright, but also meets the needs of their teachers and their students, and how have they been managing the challenges that they've faced. And we're pleased to have as our local presenter, Miss Erica Davis, who is a college librarian with the Edna Manley College of the Performing Arts. Thank you very much, Miss Davis. And now I hand it over to you and to put up your slides, and we're ready to go. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to share. I will now share my presentation and get right into it. During a pandemic, librarians and their team members are faced with a number of challenges, the greatest of which is how do we keep ourselves safe, our customers safe, our staff safe, and yet still satisfy our clientele with their academic pursuits, whether it be for our lecturers, staff, students, researchers, and even our walk-in visitors. To be or not to be. In our case, we at the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts, specifically at the Edward Seaga Library and Resource Center, are going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we do not know when this will end. Do we just close our doors, sit back, and die? For us, there were three main challenges. One, meeting the research, study, and information needs of our clientele. Two, the financial challenges of being able to purchase, acquisition, or subscribe to relevant materials, both in print, non-print, and audiovisuals, to support the curriculum in the visual and performing arts within relatively short periods or on demand. Three, meeting the needs of faculty to have scholarly and peer-reviewed materials, books, journals, audiovisual resources, access to online resources, databases, and other critical resources, and to be able to provide support for such materials to be accessible via Moodle, a learning management system that we currently use. Before COVID-19, faculty, staff, students were accustomed to visiting the library, sitting around tables and accessing the resources, majority of which were copyrighted materials. Now, faculty, staff, the students are in different spaces needing to access these resources. Between March 2020 and May 2020, we had to adjust how we offered our library and information services. We were in our second semester of 2019-2020. Then COVID-19 pandemic hit Jamaica. Faculty, staff, students needed access to resources immediately at the snap of their fingers, depending on their needs for class presentations, assignments, readings, most of which were on our library shelves, chapters from books, access to play scripts, workbooks, and so on. Each person needed access now. Before COVID-19 pandemic, we already had challenges with purchasing and subscribing to both print and online resources. The high cost of books and subscriptions to online resources are at times prohibitive. Each academic year, there are requests to purchase books and to supplement these with subscriptions to more relevant databases that are specific to the needs of our faculty and students. We explored consortial type arrangements with the College Libraries Information Network for access to ebooks via ProQuest eBook Central and received trial periods for other online resources. Still, there are challenges. Each institution is unique and has varying information needs, especially for an arts institution. Access to scholarly and peer-reviewed materials are not easily accessible in Jamaica. We have had to network with overseas vendors and database aggregators. No, having the majority of our courses being offered online has exacerbated our need to be able to access timely and adequate content. The highly recommended textbooks have been purchased over time to support the college's curriculum. However, some highly recommended textbooks are not in online or ebook format. We do not wish to breach the copyright law and fair use guidelines. And even though we have a tertiary institution license, which has enabled the authors to be able to receive royalties based on the payment of the fees and the submission of our Digitrack log, the challenges are still severe. For example, mitigating against that which may be deemed as accumulated printing and percentage restriction of scanning and printing from highly recommended textbooks, which are oftentimes unavailable locally for our students to purchase. And given budgetary constraints, it is impossible to purchase everything that we need. Thus, options are being explored to enable our library clientele to be provided with timely information and access to content. The main initiatives that we have explored are as follows. Meeting the deans, their team members, and faculty members to determine priority needs to support the curriculum, especially for highly recommended textbooks, non-print materials, and audiovisual resources. 2, document delivery service and ask a librarian service via the library's email so that we can monitor the requests with a view to explore alternative ebook titles if applicable. Customers can interact with the librarians and library staff for information help. A part of the process also involves networking with other institutions, vendors, for materials we do not necessarily have access. 3, where there are uncertainties on how to treat certain requests, contact is made with JAMCOPY for advice. For example, if ebooks or full text copyrighted materials are available on the internet freely, can we download and make multiple copies and further distribute them? We do not want to frustrate our customers. They need the information and the access is needed now. 4, we have also reached out to specific vendors to explore print to ebook conversion. They would have access to certain publishers who may grant licenses for this to be done. The schools have been asked to submit their course guides for the pulling of textbooks, whereby a listing of these titles were entered in an Excel document and the ISBN numbers located. This to assist with contacting the vendors to explore access to the ebooks format or explore the conversion of print to ebooks format. There are many challenges with providing access to copyrighted materials in, for example, print, video, audio visuals, and ebooks at this time. We are working through it. Materials are becoming increasingly costly to access, and there are high expectations from our clientele. They need the information and they need it like yesterday. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Davis, for sharing your perspective on the needs of institutions during this COVID period and the need for access online of your teaching staff and your students and the challenges that the Edna Manley College has faced. To those who have joined us since we began, welcome to this third webinar being hosted by the Jamaican Copyright Licensing Agency. My name is Philippa Davies. I'm Assistant General Manager at JAMCOPY. With me is Dr. Joan Pinkney, who is the licensing and Client Services Manager, and Mr. Edward Knight, who is Client Services and Communications Officer. And we have as our special guests from the Edna Manley College of Performing Arts, Erica Davis, and we'll be soon hearing from our two international guests. Before I introduce them, just to let persons know that we will have a time for question and answer and interaction with our guests. And so this is an opportunity for you who are in the tertiary world and are experiencing challenges with ensuring that you're providing copyright protected material and access to material in a way that respects copyright. This is an opportunity to interact with us and our guests who are from an international perspective as well as local perspective. So thank you very much all who have joined us today. Now I am going to invite our first of our international guests, Miss Melanie Johnson, who is the Copyright Officer at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, to share with us what has been her experience and experience of her university during this COVID-19 period to ensure a seamless access to information for students and lecturers that preserves copyright for authors and any other challenges that they have faced. Ms. Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippa. I'd just like to say thank you very much to Philippa for inviting me to speak to you today in Jamaica. I wish I was there physically with you, but I'm here in Auckland, New Zealand, where it is much colder than it is in Jamaica. I'd like to say also that our experience in New Zealand was very similar to Erica's in Jamaica. However, we started the year at a different time. So the borders to China closed on the 3rd of February in New Zealand, and it was closed to foreign travellers who either left from China or transited through China. Universities in New Zealand and Australia were about to start the 2020 academic year with a cohort of our international students in China and unable to get into New Zealand. Luckily, some of these students elected to continue their enrolment and study remotely in China. So New Zealand universities are very dependent on international students for funding our universities. So there were certainly many copyright challenges in teaching remotely in the virtual classroom. The New Zealand Copyright Act hasn't kept up with changes to the way we teach, and certainly not teaching remotely. Teachers can make single copies of works for teaching purposes, and this would cover copying works and putting them in PowerPoints and playing those in class. There's nothing to cover recording those lectures and uploading them into the learning management system. The biggest challenge The biggest challenge for us was getting students access to print textbooks. Students in China were unable to buy print textbooks or access the library collections of physical books. So all teaching and access to content had to be online. New Zealand universities have a license to make multiple copies of print material from Copyright Licensing Limited, which extends the amount that can be copied under the Copyright Act from 3% or 3 pages to 10% or 1 chapter, whichever is greater. Of course, the 10% allowed under the CLL license wasn't going to meet the needs of those students to get access to textbooks. With such large sums of money at stake, the university was determined to do everything it could to retain these students. The then Vice-Chancellor estimated a loss of $15 million for the University of Auckland, the effects of which would be felt for many years to come, as those students normally carried on for years 1, 2, and 3 of their degrees and often into postgraduate study. So the university set up a study plan for all overseas students in which lecturers were required to create a group space in our learning management system, which is Canvas. This was to enable extra support to be given to these students. Other students enrolled in the same courses did not have access to this group space. The University of Auckland has a reading list management tool called TELUS, which checks compliance with the copyright license and reports all usage of content copied under the license. Collection development librarians and myself checked through all the print textbooks that were listed on the TELUS reading list and tried to find electronic alternatives for students. Teaching staff were told that site licenses for textbooks listed in TELUS would be the only ones considered. This was deliberate not only for ease of processing, but also to encourage use of the system. When the whole country went into lockdown and the university started teaching remotely, there were nearly 2,500 books which were either not available electronically or for which the library was unable to purchase a site license for. Because we've got a very productive working relationship with copyright licensing, we approached them first. We initially sought permission to copy 100% of print textbooks, and CLL agreed to approach rights owners on our behalf. They had some success, but in the end, it just proved too time-consuming and too difficult. Instead, copyright licensing granted us an extension to the license to copy up to 50% of textbooks. They also agreed to continue approaching publishers to copy the 100%, where the blanket license extension was unable to meet our needs. All copies made in reliance on this extension had to be reported separately to copyright licensing. This was a huge leap from what was normally allowed under the license and not an easy decision for copyright licensing to take. One of the reasons that copyright licensing was so accommodating was because New Zealand universities have made e-reporting mandatory for all staff, and all use of licensed works is reported to copyright licensing, then pay the publishers. So the regular and consistent payments to rights owners means that publishers' traditional distrust of university is slowly softening. So when the decision was made to prepare for the closure of university campuses and move to online teaching for domestic students as well on the 23rd of March, we again approached copyright licensing, hoping to extend the license for those domestic students. It was 2 or 3 weeks into the term, and students who were going to purchase a textbook would in all likelihood have done so. Research has shown that only about 25% of students buy the textbook. The rest rely on copies in the library. So this was a huge challenge to us. Luckily, copyright licensing immediately agreed to extend the license to our domestic students. So while most publishers had agreed to copying the 100%, those who had work available in electronic format expected students to buy these. The other challenge was the use of DVDs in the virtual classroom. So under our Act, so we can show films in class, but we cannot copy those films. New Zealand universities have licenses with One Music to copy and use music for our educational purposes. And we have a license with Screen Rights, which allows the copying of communication works, which can be shared with students in the virtual classrooms. So communication works in our Act are films that are broadcast or available on the internet. What was difficult was commercial DVDs. Normally students come into the library to view DVD on the library terminals. This was where the prescriptive nature of the Copyright Act and the lack of exceptions meant there was no legal way we could copy DVDs and share them with students, either through lecture recording or by allowing them to be borrowed virtually. Unlike US universities, we cannot rely on fair use to make these available. So we really had to take a risk assessment approach to this. So we looked at the US Code of Best Practices for Fair Use for Academic and Research Libraries, which asked two key fair use questions. Did the use transform the material taken from the copyrighted work by using it for broadly beneficial purposes different from that of the original, or did it just repeat the work for the same intent and value of the original? Was the material taken appropriate in kind and amount, considering the nature of the copyright work and the use? So critical analysis of films for teaching purposes is transformative, so long as it doesn't compete with the original use of the work to entertain. It was limited to students enrolled in the course. Only what was necessary to make the point was used. We also applied a warning notice and limited the ability of students to download, copy and redistribute the material. So many staff use YouTube or documentaries, which is covered by the Screen Rights licenses. So there weren't that many DVDs that needed to be copied. So on the 8th of June, we'd eliminated COVID-19 in the community and we returned to level 1, which meant the libraries were open and students could come back into the university. The extension to the copyright licensing license was terminated at the end of semester 1 on the 21st of July. We think this was because some of the publishers were unhappy about the license. Unfortunately, this left our students in China without access to hard copy textbooks. Although we did have one possibility of getting works to these students, but it was less than satisfactory. Under Section 51 of our Copyright Act, we can supply to users a reasonable proportion of a published work, but the request for that has to come from the user themselves. So this meant that our students in China had to request the library supply them with a proportion of the book. But unfortunately, we didn't have many requests for these books, so I'm not quite sure how these students accessed the material. We suspect that they probably didn't access. So when we're checking our statistics on who's accessed materials in our reading list, it's quite a small proportion that of students who actually do the readings. So we sort of muddled along, I should say, thanks to copyright licensing. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Philippa.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie, for sharing your experience, and glad to know that you are back to normal in the midst of COVID that continues in other parts of the world for the moment. And we hope so, we hope so. But thank you very much. And to those who have just joined us, welcome to this third in a series of webinars being hosted by the Jamaican Copyright Licensing Agency. Our topic today is mitigating copyright challenges affecting teaching and learning during a pandemic. And we have local and international speakers talking about the experience of their respective educational institutions in trying to navigate the restrictions that have been brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. We heard from a local librarian, Erica Davis, from the Edna Manning College of the Performing Arts. We've just heard from Melanie Johnson from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And we'll soon be hearing from our third presenter, who is from the University of Ghana. But just to say to our participants, welcome. Thank you so much. It's good to see so many of you today, and to let you know that we will have ample time for you to pose questions to our panelists. You can either write your questions in the chat, or if you raise your hands, I can then permit you to speak. So either post the questions in the chat or raise your hand and I will permit you to speak. So thank you so much for your attendance and interest. And now I will turn the mic over to Dr. Antonia Donkor, who is Head of Reference Services Department at the Balme Library in the University of Ghana. She's based in Accra, Ghana, and she'll be sharing her experiences on navigating the COVID-19 to ensure access to works, but in a way that also respects the copyright of authors and publishers. So Dr. Donkor, the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to join you for the JAMCOPY webinar. And so I'll be presenting our perspectives from Ghana, how we are managing copyright issues and then providing access to our materials, that's library materials, during this pandemic. Okay, so I first of all want to talk about copyright in Ghana. Actually, the Copyright Act was enacted in 1961, and then it was actually displaced because of a number of flaws. And so it came back, or we're given a new law in 1992. And then in this copyright law, it stipulated the rights and privileges libraries and archives can derive from literary materials. So for instance, a library is allowed to just photocopy one single copy of a material or a literary work. And most often you can only do that when, let's say, the copy you had is maybe destroyed or it's missing from the collection. That's when we are allowed to run one copy. And also a library or an archive, if probably you want to run more than one copy of a particular material, you'd have to seek permission from the author or the authors of the material before reproduction can be made. And then thirdly, we also need to find out from our users to ascertain the fact that they are copying these materials for their academic work or academic purposes before the library grants access to users to run copies. And then even providing reprographic rights to users, we also take into consideration the fair copy policy, which grants only 10% access of the material to be copied. So we are allowed to only copy 10% of a particular book, for instance, for our users. And in 2016, Copy Ghana was established, and it's a collecting society, and then they look at collecting royalties on behalf of creators, because they believe that as we keep running photocopies of their materials, they lose some economic fortunes. And then before the pandemic, actually, the library has been facing some challenges, especially when it comes to increasing prices of information materials. Books keep on, prices keep surging and the materials become so expensive. Sometimes we can't buy multiple copies of a particular material because libraries are also experiencing decreasing budgets when it comes to most of our academic institutions. And then there's also the problem or the difficulty with the increasing subscription fees when it comes to the databases we use when it comes to our e-resources. And then there's also the digital divide. For us in Africa, for instance, having access to these electronic gadgets are not so easy. So the digital device, which also affects us or creates a lot of challenges when it comes to providing access to information. And then we also have the challenges with data and bandwidth and all of that. And then when it comes to payment for downloading articles and e-resources, it also becomes a challenge for us. And then constant electricity supply to be even able to sometimes provide services, even in the libraries, become a challenge, especially when the public electricity grids go off. We sometimes do not even have generators to provide constant or continued access to these electronic materials. And then another challenge when it comes to copyright is determining fair use, especially for our printed materials. It is said that you can only provide 10% photocopy. If somebody wants to photocopy the material, the person is allowed to do just 10% of the material. So sometimes when they come to you, it's difficult to determine the 10% of the material. And we also have students coming in who would come, for instance, if it's a 5-chaptered book, they'll come today, run copy of the first chapter because they know you won't allow them to run the entire copy, the entire book. So they come this week, they run chapter 1, standing on fair use. Another time they come, they run another chapter, chapter 2. Before long, you realize that the students have the entire book. So it becomes very difficult determining exactly what fair use of a particular material should be. And then we also have the mass photocopying of printed materials. That also becomes a challenge. It's actually prohibited when it comes to copyright, the laws. So it becomes difficult. Is it that a particular material shouldn't be photocopied over and over again, or maybe at one particular time we can't photocopy, let's say page 1. We can't run 100 copies of page 1. So some of these laws are quite difficult to explain and then to even be adhered to when it comes to serving clients in the library. And then came COVID-19. In March 2020, Ghana reported its first case. And so on the 16th of March, the nation was locked down. The government of Ghana issued a communique, and so we had to close down the entire country. And then the university also closed down. So the University of Ghana library system had to also close down. So we immediately had to fall on providing access to information using online services and platforms. So through the chat with the librarian, some requests come in. And with that also, at times, if we have to run a copy, it becomes difficult to even run a copy for a patron, because the law says that the copy should be run by the library for its own use. And then even if you are running a copy for a patron, you should be able to ascertain that he or she is using it for academic purposes. And then it becomes very difficult sometimes to even be sure or certain that whatever they are coming for is going to be used mainly for academic purposes. And we also granted access through our off-campus access to electronic resources, and we had some article requests and all of that. And then these requests kept increasing because we were on lockdown. We had to be able to provide users with some of these materials. And then the challenge for us was with bandwidth, connectivity, access to data, and even technical skills when it comes to being able to manage the online platforms. So in June 2020, 15th of June actually, there was partial lockdown, and so institutions, higher institutions actually could go back to complete the second semester. And so from that time, we had more requests coming in. People, because of their thesis, they want to run copies of materials. Some come in and they want to even scan the materials because they are limited to the amount of time they can stay even in the library. We were not running full services. So they come in and they quickly want to run copies of their materials. And with that, we can't allow patrons to also run the entire material. They can't photocopy the entire material. And so it was a little bit of a challenge when it comes to that. Some patrons come in and they want to even scan or take pictures of these literary works, and then they are all not allowed. So it's quite a challenge serving our clients in the midst of the pandemic. So how are we managing? Actually, the university has provided staff with mobile data. We've been given phone numbers. For instance, a particular telecom company is providing the service. And so we are given data to be able to help assist patrons, especially when it comes to the live chat and the article request and all of that. And then we've also sent most of our services online. We've sent short steps as to how users can search for the information themselves and how they can help us get whatever they want given to them so that we do not infringe on copyright laws. And then we've also been able to receive some assistance from our vendors, especially when it comes to the e-resources. Some of these vendors have increased access to their content. So therefore, we are able to serve our patrons widely. And then some of them are also providing training, even as to how to use some of these e-books and e-resources so that users would be able to use the information within the confines of copyright laws. And we are also adhering very much to the fair use of published materials, although it's not so easy because users want increased access, but because we are applying or complying to the fair rule policy, we are not able to open up so much to give them so much information. We are still working within the 10% fair use of materials or copying of materials. So we are hoping that in future, some of these copyright laws would be kind of liberated, or they will be a little flexible so that we'll be able to provide more services to clients, because we are now running what we can call a rotational shift, flexible working hours. And so the number of hours the library is even opened is now very limited. We do just about sometimes half day, and then we don't provide full services. We just ask our patrons to use our e-resources and our online platforms because we need to keep users, faculty, and then library staff safe. So far, this is what we have been doing to manage the pandemic in Ghana, and precisely the BAM Library. So I would want to say thank you very much for your attention, and then thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to also share with you how we are mitigating these copyright challenges with this pandemic. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Donkor, for sharing with us your experiences and the challenges that you're facing in trying to maintain access by students to content and to provide it in a timely and seamless fashion. But thank you very much. I think we can also identify with some of the challenges that you have expressed and that would have existed even outside of COVID-19. So thank you very much to all our presenters who have shared with us. We're going to now have an opportunity for interaction with our librarians and our panelists. You can post your questions in the chat or raise your hand and I will acknowledge you and allow you to speak. But I'm also going to allow my presenter from JAMCOPY, Dr. Joan Pinkney, to raise a question to our panelists.
Well, thank you very much, Filippo. Just wanted to explain or make a comment in relation to what was mentioned by Erica, Ms. Davis, in her presentation, that she has had requests for, well, not necessarily requests, but there have been cases where they've seen books available online and it is deemed as free and available for them to download the total book. And the question is whether you can go ahead and do the download and whether you can do multiple copies of that book. Our guide to any licensees is usually that you pay special attention to the copyright conditions that are usually on the page that the of the author or the person who's facilitating the use. So the details would speak to the conditions and how much you can copy and so on. So ensure that even though it says upfront at the face of it, it says free, you can download and so on, ensure that you go through that and double check. And if needs be, send an email to clarify so that you have something on record to give you the permission to make copies and to make future copies, not just one download, but to make future copies of the entire publication. So that's I wanted to make that point because sometimes free is in quotes, and so we have to be careful. And I'm sure that Filippo will endorse. Don't know if she wants to add anything in relation to that.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Pinkney. Let me ask if the panelists have any questions for each other, whether Erica has any questions or comments from her colleagues from Ghana or from New Zealand, or whether Melanie or Antonia have questions of each other or from Erica in Jamaica, based on what you've heard as their experiences in managing access to information during COVID-19.
I think, as I said previously, I think our experiences in New Zealand have been very similar to our colleagues in Jamaica and in Ghana.
Okay, well, let me turn to the first question that I see in the chat. This is from Maureen Webster, who is asked, are the lessons learned in providing access to content during the pandemic being considered for inclusion in library policies to guide the way forward? Is there any takeaway from this COVID-19 experience that would remain, hopefully, when we resume full contact to teachers and students? And I pose this to the three panelists. Any lessons that you would take forward?
I would like to take that one.
Sure.
There were many lessons learned, especially as it relates to access to online resources and the print resources. Specific now to the policies, I think that is something that libraries will now need to go in more details with, because now that our students are in different spaces and we need to meet them online in a virtual way, there are some constraints at the same time that we need to bear in mind, as well as we still have to provide the support. So I guess the policy document should, going forward, include some of these considerations.
Okay. Antonia or Melanie?
Yes, I would want to also contribute a little to this question. It's already been said, we have similar issues or challenges. And then I think the way forward now is to acquire more e-resources for our libraries. The only problem is when it comes to the subscription fees, these are quite exorbitant, and library budgets are really falling when it comes to Ghana and all of that. But this pandemic is really bringing our focus to the fact that we need more e-content in our libraries, and so it's very, very it's right we take some of these experiences into consideration in our library policies. For us in BAM Library, for instance, we are trying to implement a 60-40, that's 60% e-content and then at least 40% print content in the libraries, so that even after COVID, we'll be able to provide extensive access to materials in the library to our patrons and students and faculty. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we have a similar policy as well. Our current policy is preferring electronic resources because many of our students study remotely. We're in the centre of Auckland, and some of our poorest students live right on the outskirts, and many of those can't afford to come into the university regularly. And so we like to provide recorded lectures and also print resources for those students so they're not disadvantaged. And I think the other thing that came through very clearly with this lockdown was that many of our lecturers write the textbooks that our students use, but they weren't able to provide those to the students in electronic form or distribute them to the students because they'd assigned copyright to the publisher. So we're making a concerted effort to try and encourage our lecturers to actually write their textbooks and make them available openly. So we're looking at how we can support those lecturers in the different ways in which textbooks can be presented to students electronically, perhaps with collaboration. And I think the other thing we learned from this was the importance of those relationships with other universities and even universities overseas. Because when we were locked down, we weren't physically able to go into the library, so we couldn't digitize content to make it available to students. So we were actually sharing with other universities who had already digitized content so we could make these available to students. So I think that's one thing that the COVID-19 has brought home to us, how important it is to collaborate and share our resources.
Thank you. So yes, building collaboration, sharing resources. This is one positive outcome of the global COVID-19 experience. Let me ask Erica and Antonia, are there any other benefits that have come out of this experience? Perhaps the universities were thinking about, it was on the back burner, but has now been brought to the forefront because of COVID in terms of making resources available or even collaboration with other similar institutions?
Okay, there is one area that we are currently looking into, which I think because of the situation we're faced with now, for example, research papers that are written by students, and there are certain research courses that students would like to look at what other students have written, but we have that as print resources only based on the submissions that were done physically. So now what I have been asked to explore is, okay, when you get these papers, consideration for online upload, being accessible via the website. That to me is something that is now, it's now something that we need to, I guess, push forward with more quickly now, because students need to see what others have written, and especially in the arts with this type of research process, if it's not available online and it's on our shelves, then who's going to access it if the students are really engaging virtually? So that's a positive that has come out of it. as well as the idea of digital preservation. What is it that we need to put in place so that we have these sustainable over time for persons to gain access?
Great, thank you very much. Antonio, any pluses out of this experience of COVID that has put an impetus in changing the experience in Ghana? Yes?
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Actually, we have also realized the need to go digital with most of our services. And like I already said, trying to even put in our policy the need for more e-content so that users can have readily access to their materials. And with the pandemic, we also realized that even as staff, we need a lot of collaboration amongst ourselves as librarians, among the different libraries on campus and even in Ghana. And so there is already an existing consortium, but with this pandemic, we've realized the need for more of such collaborations in Ghana amongst the libraries. Yeah, so look, moving forward, I'm sure we are going to do more collaborative work, even purchasing of these e-materials and e-content so that we'd have access to much information for our users. So that's what I can add to. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Joseph Carr to the panelists. Can you address the matter of technical support, both training and devices for library staff in order to support online services? So the matter of technical support, whether training or devices in order to support online services. That's for our three panelists, whoever would wish to respond.
I'll take that one. At the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts, our ICT support is very strong. For example, in the context of the physical space, students have access to computing devices that they can still come in to access resources. As it relates to training, especially for us who are now on the work from home engagement, we still have to offer the services to our customers, even though we're working from home. And so there was a training schedule for all library staff, all staff for that matter at the college. And the support has been ongoing as well. And it has been very good. In some cases, I think the challenges are that there are a few library staff who would need access to the technology to be able to work from home, such as laptops specifically, and internet access, which for them sometimes come at a cost. But in terms of support for the work-related tasks, it has been good so far. And the support it has been very encouraging.
That's great, thank you. Melanie, Antonio, any comments from your end in terms of technical support?
At the University of Auckland, we have very good.
Please go ahead.
We have very good technical support at the University of Auckland. We're also moving towards the situation where all staff have laptops. So at any moment we can work from home. So far as other devices, I think we have pretty good internet coverage here in New Zealand. So most people would have access to the internet from working from home. We had an opportunity when we went back to level 3 to go back into the library to pick up any extra devices that we need. So we'd already had 4 weeks in total lockdown where we couldn't travel. But once we went to level 3, I was able to go into the university and get a large screen because I was getting quite a sore neck from just working off my laptop. So there was a lot of extra support available. Thank you.
Okay, So to share, when it comes to technology in Ghana, actually for University of Ghana during the lockdown in March, we were provided with mobile data to help us with data to access the internet and also to provide online services for patrons. And then for us in BAM Library, actually the entire UGLS, that's the University of Ghana Library System, we've had training for the whole of November, and it's ending on the 9th. So we're trying as much as possible to train all library staff from management down to, the junior library staff. Everyone is involved in this training program so that we'll be able to provide more access and provide more services to our users using our online platforms. So just that when it comes to technology, staff, for instance, have not been given, let's say, gadgets, maybe laptops, what have you, but when more computers have been made available in our research commons, in our knowledge commons, so that when students come in, they would be able to have these equipment to support their work, especially because most of them were preparing to submit their thesis around the time that the pandemic struck. So we provided a number of computers in both the Knowledge Commons, which is for undergraduates, and then the Research Commons for postgraduate students to be able to finish quickly with their project work. So we are providing a lot of training to library staff to be able to provide services even from home to patrons. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think across the world that the pandemic has forced librarians and copyright owners to find ways to manage in order to preserve their rights, but also to ensure continued access to works. We have a couple of questions from Instagram. I'm going to read them. The first from Latifa Byfield. What would JAMCOPY recommend to libraries trying to go fully digital, being that JAMCOPY does not necessarily monitor online usage? And I will also ask our international guests to also comment on this. How would you recommend to libraries? What would you recommend to libraries trying to go fully digital, being that JAMCOPY does not necessarily monitor online usage? Well, we do have a limited monitoring of online usage through our international agreements with our equivalents in the US and in Canada, and they and
Of course, Jamaica.
with Jamaica. And so the point is that the copyright principle still applies, whether we're dealing with paper versions or digital versions. The principle still applies that the copyright owner has the right to permit or not permit the making of copies, whether they're digital copies or physical copies. So libraries going fully digital will still need to comply with the Copyright Act. And if they're making copies available, digital copies, well, I think the providers of digital works do have rules to govern how many copies can be made by the library offering a service or the user. So the principles still apply, whether it's a physical or a digital copy. And there are libraries that would have arrangements, agreements with digital providers that allow only a certain number of e-copies being made, or providing access, digital access to their digital library, and limitations on the copies that can be made or how long they can be kept if they do download copies. So the copyright principles don't disappear because it's now digital. It's just adjusted for that environment. Let me just go to a question from Jeanette Johnson. How does the Copyright Act in your country view digitization of popularly used textbooks? So how does the Copyright Act in New Zealand, in Ghana, and Jamaica view digitization of popularly used textbooks? let me ask Antonia to answer, and then Melanie.
Okay, thank you very much. When it comes to Ghana, we do not allow, especially in the BAM library, we don't allow the digitization of our textbooks. We are not allowed to scan, and then the digitization unit will not digitize for you. Actually, when patrons want any material digitized, we send it to the digitization unit, and then we make sure that they would comply with copyright laws when it comes to the digitization of materials. So we don't provide that service to our users. Yes, sometimes they are able to take pictures, and even with that, it's under the supervision of library staff. We don't allow users to have their own way when it comes to these literary works. So we follow the copyright rules as well when it comes to digitization of materials. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Melanie, any comments from the New Zealand experience?
In New Zealand, just digitizing a textbook would be a breach of copyright, but there are some exceptions to that. I think, as I said previously, we can digitize 3% or 3 pages of a work, whichever is greater, and make that available to our students, but we couldn't make that publicly available. Under the library provisions, we can provide a reasonable proportion of a work to a user. So that's anyone who requests a reasonable proportion of a work, the library can make that proportion available to that person. So how much they can make available will depend on the circumstances. But they can't copy the whole work. But say if it was an older book that was out of print, you could probably copy quite a bit of that book. But if it was a popular textbook that the publisher still had in print, you could probably print very little of it without you'd have to consider what was reasonable. And if it was still available for purchase and they wanted so much of it as they should have bought the book, then it would be a breach of copyright.
Thank you. And in terms of the Jamaican experience, the simple principle of doing anything with a work, permission would need to be sought from the copyright owner. But our Copyright Act does give permission to the National Library of Jamaica and the Jamaica Society of Blind to make a soft copy of a work, but it is very limited, again, in terms of the use of the work. And this is only by these prescribed institutions that are permitted to make a digital version or a soft copy of the work. But I'm now going to move to our second presentation for this afternoon, and that will be from our licensing officer here at JAMCOPY, who will speak about the JAMCOPY license, how it supports teaching and learning generally, and especially now during the pandemic, changes that have been put into the JAMCOPY license to facilitate continued access to works during this pandemic. And to present on this topic will be our licensing manager, Dr. Joan Pinkney. There will be time for further questions and answers following her presentation. Dr. Pinkney.
Thank you very much, Filippo. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. And let me just say thanks again for all those persons who have joined. I just did a saw count of 94, which is really great. And we're happy that you're on and to share in this experience. So I guess it may be prudent to share with you what JAMCOPY is. And JAMCOPY is the national, or Jamaica's National Reproduction Rights Organization, RRO. We were established in 1998 and we began operating in 1999. And that same year we received recognition from the government of Jamaica. like all other or most other agencies, were set up by Jamaican creators and publishers of copyrighted works, and those works that appear in print. We were given the mandate from the copyright holders, or rights holders, if you will, to manage their reproduction rights. Now, the functions of JAMCOPY entails obtaining mandates from copyright holders, persons who are creators of works, whether you are a photographer, an artist, or an artiste. But as long as your work appear in print, whether you're a publisher or and of course the range of type of publishers, the list is quite long. But whatever it is that you do in respect of publication or publishing a work, you can become a member. And so we obtain mandates from the respective creator and or publisher to manage the rights in their work. We also enter into bilateral agreements with other countries. As Philippa mentioned earlier, that we have sister agencies that we interact with, of course, facilitated by IFRO, International Federation of Reproduction Rights Organization. And these bilateral agreements simply help us to have an appreciation for best practices, what is good and what should obtain. And we seek to follow, of course, the respective laws would kick in for the region or for the respective country. But as far as practices within the agency is concerned, we seek to follow through. And of course, the bilateral agreement entails the management of the works, or the assistance with the management of the works in the respective countries. So we have over 39 such countries with which we have those arrangements. So they manage the copyright within their country on behalf of all our copyright holders or creators and our publishers. And we do the same for them because this agreement is reciprocal. JAMCOPY also grants licenses to mass users, and this is one of the ways that we seek to manage the rights within the works that the creators would have entrusted in us to assist with the management of the copyright. And so we grant licenses, and of course the licenses are in exchange for a fee. And that fee, we label it as royalty, and that is then paid back to the creators and publishers. And we do, we label that activity of payment as distribution. And we have distribution once per year. And usually this is the month that we usually have distribution. And we are in fact in the process of preparing to have that happen by next week. And of course, where there is the need, we do carry out enforcement activities. We try to speak to persons where we see any evidence of infringement, because we're not really adversarial, but we do seek to help persons to understand the importance of staying within the confines of the Copyright Act. No, collective management of rights is generally linked to the administration of secondary rights, which is really the reuse of or the alternate use of existing works. So we're talking about photocopying, we're talking about scanning, those kinds of things are what we would deem as the secondary use. And of course, there may be the license that JAMCOPY offers also provides for what we call alternate use, which would include changing a font or facilitating Braille for those persons who may need that kind of assistance. Typically, JAMCOPY offers blanket licenses, and by blanket we mean that it covers not just for an entire period of time, say 3 years, but it also provides for each time persons want to make copies, they don't have to call us to say, I'm going to make a copy, ensure that the X or Y is in place. But the license provides for the reuse, the secondary use of works, and that is over a period of 3 years pending renewal. We also offer other rights, other clearance services, and those are dealt with as the needs arise. So the license gives permission to the copyright, or for licensees rather, to copy as much as, well, over and above the 5% as is allowed by the Copyright Act. Copyright Act says that if you need to make copies of works, copyrighted works, you are allowed, as a tertiary institution, you are allowed 5% under the Copyright Act. But JAMCOPY has expanded that, and with, of course, a permission from the government of Jamaica. And so our normal copying limits is way above what the Copyright Act provides for. And so any published work, you can copy 10 to 15% of that work, and at most 20%, a chapter which is 20% or less. But since the COVID-19 pandemic, we recognize, and having had licensees making contact with us saying, hey, we're not in our physical libraries, persons are saying that they need more copying and they need more work, so how can we facilitate that? We made contact with our publishers who are who are members of JAMCOPY, and made the request for us to expand the copying limits. And we've done, we did that when COVID-19 struck. I think it was in June or it was in May, and we expanded it to 35%, and we're coming from 20%, we expanded it to 35% or 3 chapters. And we expanded it again in October when we recognized that COVID-19 was still here and seemingly was going to be here for a while. And that extension will expire at the end of December. And of course, we would review it, and where necessary, we would advise our licensees. So whereas you could have only copied up to a chapter which is 20% or less, you can do 35% of a printed work and or 3 chapters. Of course, there are some works that already you could copy the entire work, things like a sheet music and so on. You could have done the full document in the first instance. But this particular extension relates to where you have a textbook or where you have other literature that you may need to copy chapters. So that extension, as I said, expires December 31, and we will be reviewing it certainly prior to that to accommodate further extension if necessary, and our licensees will be advised. So as Philippa mentioned earlier, that we do offer digital coverage, if you will, and works within Jamaica, all of the creators and publishers within Jamaica and the United Kingdom and the United States of America. And if persons require any other works from other territories, there is always, as Philippa said earlier, that we are willing to provide guidance. But generally speaking, the licensees must recognize that the Copyright Act and the limits within it must be maintained. There are some subscription databases. Ensure that you check the copying limits, ensure that whatever you do is within the confines of the Copyright Act and that you're not violating any or infringing on any rights. So as we are already aware, but just to reiterate, that no systematic cumulative copying. Even though we are online and we're doing all the digital and we're not physically in the space, but all the rules, all the guidelines still obtain. So no systematic cumulative copying, meaning that you shouldn't seek to copy an entire book, because that is not facilitated by JAMCOPY's license and neither by the Copyright Act. So you do still will have students who maybe they're creative and want to copy a chapter, more than 3 chapters, and so that they eventually get the entire book. That is certainly still not allowed. Because our copying should never be as a substitute for the purchasing of the book. And if the book, if the desire is to have the entire book, then they should really be advised to purchase the book rather than seeking to make copies of it, because that is not permitted under the license and that is not allowed. Copying should not include any work that is published for commercial gain. So books with, say, case studies and so on should not be copied, because those should really be purchased. And copying them in that regard would be infringing on the rights of those authors and publishers. And so in general, no copying should be done in a manner which would infringe on the rights of the creators and publishers. And just to remind us that records must be kept, even though we're online, even though we're digital based and so on, but copies must be kept because we need to get the record of what is used so that we can inform our distribution model. Our distribution, when we distribute the funds that we would have collected from each licensees, we need to know who to pay, whose books are being used, whose works are being used in the respective institutions, so that we can know who to pay your monies to. So monies from Edna Mandy, if we don't get a list of, and by the way, Edna Mandy sends their record. But if Edna Mandy doesn't send their record, then we don't know what books they're using, whose works they're using, whether they're local works or whether they're foreign works. And so we would not be able to efficiently distribute the work, the monies to the real users of the works. So even works that are copied digitally, we still require those reports. And in addition, those works that are used for alternate format, we need those as well. So all the physical ones, all the alternate format ones, and all the ones that are digitized. And of course, usually those are sent to us on a semester basis. Some persons prefer to send it per month, but certainly we would appreciate getting the record, the information every semester so that we can collate and inform our distribution model. So thank you very much for your time. And if we have any questions, I'll take them now.
Thank you very much, Joan. We have a comment from Simone Sampson to say that there are persons who have come at different times and copy sections of books and may end up copying up all chapters, which is what you were just spoken to.
Right. Well, it is sometimes very difficult for a librarian to monitor everyone who comes in. But, and that's why we suggest that you invite us, and we can do that via Zoom as well, where we can speak to the users directly so that they, because sometimes when you as the library staff, when you are trying to share with them that it is not allowed and so on, and even though there's literature of the posters and the brochures are there, sometimes they ignore. But when we actually come on and say, hey, this is not allowed, sometimes we get the attention. So feel free to invite us. We can do Zoom webinars or awareness sessions with your various users. But certainly it is, we are aware that it can be difficult for you to be able to monitor. Maybe it's a little bit easier now, but then once the work is accessible, you still, it may be difficult to be able to, once the work is accessed, rather, it may be difficult to trace and to know exactly who is doing what. But persons need to be educated as to why we're saying don't copy as much, and those kinds of details. And I think sometimes it really helps to deter them from going into that direction. But we understand the concerns, but we just have to continue to educate, to guide, and so that persons will adhere. Someone is asking whether high schools are mandated to submit photocopy information. Well, the high schools fall under the Ministry of Education. And whilst we are still in discussion with the ministry, and hopefully we will get to that point where the license will be signed, but we don't have a signed license with the Ministry of Education just yet. Let me say that, right, Philippa? And until then, the high schools, the primary schools, and all of those that fall in between are actually infringing on the rights of authors and publishers having without a license. And so if they're photocopying, which we know they are infringing. So we hope that sooner than later, we'll be able to rectify that.
But once the license comes on stream,
Right.
then the schools will be required to maintain a log
yes,
of the copies that they're making.
Yeah.
And this is important for the work of JAMCOPY, so that when we pay our royalties, we are being as close as possible to giving the monies due to the authors or the publishers whose works are being used by the schools.
Right.
So that the information is important for our work and for the authors and publishers. Thank you, Dr. Pinckney.
Yes.
Do we have any questions for Dr. Pinckney from our overseas guests and also our local guests? Antonia, Erica, Melanie, any questions you would want to ask about us, the Jamaican experience?
This is Erica. I think for the Ednam and the college, it's a bit challenging as it relates to the cumulative printing or the cumulative, how do I say it? The cumulative printing, yes, because there are times when for a class you may have, say, 30 students and they need access to specific chapters, and over time, it feels like it's the entire book. Mm-hmm. And even though we do submit our logs, which is very important, it's like we're becoming more conscious now that these are things that we need to monitor at a more stricter level. And where we find that there are those kinds of situations occurring, to actually purchase the books or to explore if they're available online. Because a lot of the materials that we use are not available locally. Right. And if somebody comes today and they say, Miss, we have this chapter that we need from this particular book, but then it's impossible to say to them, well, go to a store and purchase it because it is not available locally. Right. And they need it like today for tomorrow. It is a bit challenging.
Right. Well, the fact is that during this period, the extension is good, but generally speaking, they could only get a chapter if it is 20% or less of the book. And so we just have to continue to educate. And as I said, we're available if in the event that you need to speak with persons, we can do the Zoom, or we can do whatever it is that we need to do, to whatever platform we can use. But education is important, because I find that once persons understand why they shouldn't, then it makes a difference in how they regard what they should. But we appreciate the challenge. We're very cognizant of the challenge.
Let me ask Erica, is there a conversation between the library and the lecturers so that what is recommended on the reading lists by the lecturers, the library is informed of it ahead of time, so that materials can be purchased, procured, or access provided for students?
In our case, we are required, we collaborate with the deans of the schools and the lecturers to get the reading lists. in the March of each year. So there is a practice here where they are required to submit their required readings, highly recommended textbooks, and then we see how best to balance it because sometimes the budget doesn't allow us to be able to acquire everything. But yes, there's a practice where they submit that information to us.
And also, some of the courses are recurring, and whilst they're updates from time to time, one of the things that you can also do, Erica, for us is that you could send us the course outline, the bibliography or the reference list, because that would give us an indication of the possible textbooks that or materials that will be used.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Yes, sometimes you may not have a bulk of what was actually copied, and particularly during this time. But if you send us the reference list from your syllabus, that would give us some indication of the works that are being used.
Okay, in our case, we do have a listing now, especially during the COVID pandemic. Right. We had to prepare a listing and we have it in an Excel spreadsheet. Oh. So it's something that I'll consider sharing because we do have the challenges, especially with gaining access to these copyrighted materials and within short time frames, depending on the needs of the lecturers and their students.
Right.
We're fast approaching the end of our time on this webinar, but let me ask our overseas guests, how have our equivalents, JAMCOPY's equivalents in your respective territory assisted you in managing the need in this COVID-19 era? So that's Copy Ghana in Ghana and Copy New Zealand in New Zealand. How have our equivalents aided you in your work? Antonia?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. For us in Ghana, actually, we are not in so much contact with Copy Ghana. Some years back, my association with them, or when I got to know about them, they actually, for instance, told us about the royalties they are to collect for authors, and then the fact that they would include the copying fee, okay, in the school fees or in the fees of students, so that students can run copies of these materials, and then the royalties are distributed to the authors and the creators or writers of these materials. I think that we need more of education when it comes to the responsibility of Copy Ghana, so that we would all be able to know and then would enforce some of these rules. Because when students come to the library, we do well to comply with the copyright rules, but I'm sure students can go back to their halls of residence and copy as much content as they want, disregarding the copyright rules. So I would call or advocate for more education, like has already been established here. We need to understand more why we don't even have to infringe on these copyright laws, so that users of our information materials will be able to comply with them. So for Copy Ghana, I think Copy Ghana has a lot of work to do, because we are not in so much collaboration with them to achieve these copyright laws. So we need more education from Copy Ghana on some of these. Thank you very much. Sure.
Okay. And Melanie, yes.
Well, we worked very closely with copyright licensing in New Zealand, and we, as soon as our students in China were unable to access content, we went to copyright licensing and asked them if we could copy textbooks for the students. That they approached the publishers and got permission from most of the publishers, but unfortunately some of the publishers were strongly opposed to it. So in the end, they granted us a license to copy 50% of textbooks. And I think in most cases that was all that was needed. Lecturers were able to pick out the key chapters that they needed. And that, I mean, in many cases, not even 50% was copied from the textbooks. And the other thing that we have, which I said in my presentation, is we have TALIS, and that actually controls what lecturers can upload. So they can't upload any more than is in the license. So any request for greater than 10% or 20% gets rejected. And we have to give them a reason why it's been rejected. So I think staff do understand, and we have a lot of information on our website. And I think the fact that publishers are getting paid regularly now, because previously we used to get a manual survey once every 5 years. Now we report to copyright licensing 3 times a year, which means they're able to distribute to the publishers more frequently, which means they're actually able to offer us more than previously. So now we can copy from interlibrary loans. They're looking to offer the same sort of services that the Copyright Clearance Centre in the US is offering. So we are able to go to them to copy from electronic journal articles, for example. So there's been a lot of benefits from mandating e-reporting for all the universities in New Zealand. So we have TALIS, some of the other universities have e-reserve, and I think Canterbury has got their own system which plugs into Moodle, which is an open access system. Great. So we've been working very closely with them.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Melanie. And also Antonio and Erica for sharing your experiences. I think we see that with this global pandemic that we have global concerns. We can learn from each other, but also we can benefit from each other's experiences and how to preserve the rights of authors and publishers, but also to ensure access to our users in this time, and that there are opportunities for collaboration as well as to increase digitization and access to works in various formats. So let me just thank our presenters again, Erica Davis from the Edna Manning College of Performing Arts in Kingston, Jamaica, Melanie Johnson from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, Antonia Doncor from the University of Ghana in Ghana. We really appreciate your making yourselves available, despite the different time zones, for this very rich sharing of common concerns, but also how you've been managing the challenges brought on before COVID, as well as with COVID. And may I wish you well as you try to ensure access to your clientele, but also all the very best for the upcoming Christmas season. I really want to thank you for your availability. Let me just read something from Marilyn White, who says, thanks for this informative webinar. She had no idea that there was a copyright arrangement with the Ministry of Education. She's concerned about the digital divide, and she's sending out resources to students, but this webinar will help to make her more mindful about what she's sharing with students. So thank you so much to the organizers, panelists, and attendees. And certainly, Ms. White, be in touch with us at JAMCOPY as we go forward in negotiating this license with the Ministry of Education. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We have had 87 attendees, our highest yet. This is a lovely Christmas gift. Wow, 94. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see what happens in 2021. But I think that perhaps this might be a good way of connecting with everyone in your various spaces to keep you informed about the work of JAMCOPY, but the importance of promoting and protecting copyright. Thanks again to our guests across the waters in Ghana, New Zealand, and locally. I wish you well for the upcoming season, that you will be safe and healthy, and it will be peaceful and enjoyable. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Philippa. Thank you.
So much. Thank you too. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Philippa. It's been a pleasure and very interesting.
So glad. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a good rest of the afternoon and a happy Merry Christmas and all the best for 2021. All right. Hope we can gather in numbers very soon once again.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.